It's our privilege. It's my charge and privilege to speak with Greg Rubin. He's a former aerospace engineer who transitioned to and founded the native landscaping firm California's own Native Landscape Design. He has designed over 800 residential, commercial, and institutional native landscapes in Southern California. He's a best-selling author and researcher on the topic of native landscaping. He was named the 2018 Horticulturalist of the Year by the San Diego Horticultural Society. Most significant and relevant to us, Los Angeles and California, he has become a fire resistant landscaping expert. I finally got the term right. I apologize for that. But here's my first question, Greg. People are much more than the short biographies allude to. Could you tell us what you would like us to know about you, or what, if anything, you would like to share that your impressive bio leaves out?
Yeah, I'll send you a check on Monday. No. Hey, thank you guys. I'm incredibly honored to be here tonight, and I'm sorry Charles couldn't be with us tonight, but Andy, you're doing a great job in his absence, and I appreciate everything that you've pulled together here. Yeah, so we've been at this since the mid '90s. That's when I got my contractor's license. I actually started with natives back in the mid '80s. But one of my mentors was a gentleman named Bert Wilson, who is the owner of Las Politas Native Nursery up in San Luis Obispo. And not only was Bert one of the greatest native nurserymen out there, he was also a 14-year CAL FIRE veteran. And so he's been beating fire resistant design into my head since day one. And, you know, I had a pretty good career as an aerospace engineer, and so I had that science background. Bert was a biochemist. He's passed away, unfortunately. But he really taught me a lot of things that have really played out in practice. And we've been through now 25 fire events, knock wood, without the loss of a house. And it's played out pretty much as predicted. And pretty much what we're discovering is that most of the conventional wisdom about fire ecology, fire behavior in urban settings, uh, plants, and what's burning down homes is wrong. And a lot of this legislation that everybody's screaming about, especially the Zone Zero stuff, it's all coming from Northern California, which is undergoing an understandable kind of a panicked knee-jerk response. I mean, I get it, but this whole offshore wind-driven fire phenomenon up there is, in the overall scheme of things, relatively recent compared to what we've been experiencing down here all our lives in Santa Ana wind events. And the way they're modeling fires it's overly simplistic, and it's not coming out of Southern California. So those are just some of the things that kind of introduced me, but I'm curious to see what questions you came up with.
All right, well, here we go. I might change the order since you brought it up, and I will change the order on one of them since you brought it up, and I want folks to know. So give me 1 second. Could you clarify for individuals on the call what the different fire zones are and the importance of native landscaping in those zones? So I did change it up just
Okay.
because I want them to know.
Yeah, so, you know, basically, prior to the most recent events, we were looking at Zone 1 and Zone 2. Zone 1 was 30, up to 30 to 50 feet out from the house. Zone 2 started there. It could go out. It just seems to be increasing in size. driven by the insurance industry. The new kid on the block is zone 0. And zone 0 is the first 5 feet out from the house. And basically, where they're going with this, they don't want any vegetation there. And I have mixed feelings about this because all of our new construction, we're already putting aprons around the houses. Usually they're decomposed granite or gravel, and sometimes concrete, which I'm not fond of. It's easy to implement when it's a new landscape, right? But then if you've got let's say, retired folks that have this beautiful 50-year-old azalea that's, growing right pretty close to the house, can we truly expect them to just tear it out? You know, is that really going to buy you anything? Could it even make you more vulnerable to embers, right? And so, our approach has been, well, if we have vegetation close to the house, I prune it away from the house as best I can, prune it out from under the eaves as best I can, make sure it's healthy, cut out any dead, sick growth, and have a nice day. I mean, it's just, it could be that simple, I think, but there's a lot of performative stuff going on here, and there's a lot of fear. And again, the problem is they're modeling these fires as fuel driven and not wind driven. Okay, which is all the difference in the world. So those are the basic kind of, that's the basic zone setup.
Okay. Good. I just wanted folks to know, especially, so just so everyone knows, I cheated a little bit and Greg helped me. He sent me a couple articles and webinars, so I have advanced knowledge of this topic. So I cheated. I will share that information with you if you're okay if I share that with them, Greg. So,
Oh, please do. And it makes
okay.
for the best interviews anyway, Andy. So
All right. So I will
we're
share
about
that with everyone
education.
in the chat. Yes, knowledge is power. So I am going to go back to another question, and I'm wondering if you could share. So this is my assumption based on what I've heard. Traditional wildfire prevention tips and methodology often omit native landscaping. Could you speak to its importance and significance and why, in your opinion, it's been neglected for so long? And could you tell us if it's gaining any traction?
Well, yes, it's gaining traction. I have to tell you that, after 800 plus landscapes, we've been able to learn a thing or two. And what has to happen, because we've had these, you know, um, mountains and valleys of interest in native plants. And what has happened in the past is they've become very popular, almost a fad. And then they'd all start dying in people's landscapes. And then they would get this horrible reputation. A good percentage of landscape architects, honestly, they hate native plants because they die. And the reason they die is they try to apply ornamental horticulture to native ecology. It's like never the two shall meet. All right. It's very, very, very different approaches. And for us, the success has been to emulate as best we can the native ecology in the home landscape. All right. So we're working to get those protocols out there to overcome this resistance and all the misconceptions and myths that surround native landscaping. And pertaining to our talk is fire. I mean, you would listen to some of these people and you think you plant a native plant near the house is going to spontaneously burst into flames and burn down the house. Okay. Well, guess what? In our pretty extensive, experience, it's pretty much the opposite. And what really throws people is when I say it's not about plant lists. When I do these talks, one of the first questions will often be, oh, what's your list of fireproof native plants? And it's like, it doesn't work that way. Not at all. It's about hydration. Hydration, hydration, hydration. Live fuel moisture content, LFMC, has always been the measure by which fire seasons are determined to be start, their their end, and their intensity. Okay. There's a reason for that because that is an indicator of flammability. And so our approach has always been to do lightly hydrated native landscapes. And there's a corollary there that it takes so little supplemental irrigation to actually hydrate a drought tolerant native plant. So, with all this, since your fires, LA fires, and the panic, they're just telling everybody to remove all the vegetation from around the house. Well, in our experience, and fortunately in a lot of other people's experience, they're seeing that vegetation might be actually saving the houses, right? And if you have hydrated oak trees, sycamores, Catalina cherries, whatever, that they're darn hard to light up. I mean, you could take even a manzanita that's been lightly irrigated, take a blowtorch and try to light it up. It's pretty darn difficult. Okay, so preserving the health and hydration of your native landscape may be the best thing you can do for fire. And so this is what we're trying to overcome. I mean, it's almost the exact opposite of what people think. And we've got a lot of experience to back it up, plus a 4-year research project we did for the United States Navy. So
I'm gonna change it up again since you brought it up. So I thank you for that. Could you talk about the research study that you did for the Navy and what made it unique? And I have a cheat as well. In the webinar that I watched and had the privilege of watching, you specifically mentioned the novelty of employing science.
yeah, right. God forbid, right? Well, all right. So back, um, so we've been through all these different major fire events, haven't lost a home. I started doing presentations on this stuff back in the early 2000s. And representatives from the US Navy came and heard a couple of my presentations. And people go, why is the US Navy, of all people, interested? I mean, they're out in the middle of the ocean, right? Well, yes, except that they administer tens, if not hundreds of thousands of acres of naval housing, which is located usually on these big bases right up against the wildland interface. Okay. So when someone comes along and says, you know what, you can surround your communities with green belts of lightly irrigated native plants, which will provide habitat, year-round beauty, incredible erosion control, low water use, low maintenance, and oh, by the way, it's fire resistant. That got their attention. So a gentleman, Dr. John Keeley, who's one of the world's foremost fire ecologists here in California, I enlisted his help and we were co-principal investigators, and he designed the experiments. And what we did is we looked, in fact, the chaparral behind me was on the property of one of our test subjects. Each of these houses had to have had survived a major fire event, had planted natives surrounding the house, also thinned chaparral by common prescriptions, and then a unmodified control. Okay, and we set up weather stations, we set up soil moisture meters, and we gathered detail throughout the year for 4 years. And we gave all that data to John, and they ran it through a very sophisticated fire modeling program, because people are a little loath to have you lighting fires on their properties. And what came out was very coherent, very supportive of our approach. And it was based on all this data we were gathering, environmental and moisture data. And what it found was that the rate of fire spread was lowest with native lightly irrigated plantings, followed not far behind by natural chaparral that had been maintained and thinned by about 40 to 50%. No more. You don't want to go any more than that because it becomes diminishing returns or makes the problem worse. And certainly a lot better rates of fire spread than the control. Okay. No study had even looked at, thinning as a fuel modification technique, tested it. So he said the data was more definitive than he ever expected. And since that time, it's become part of my presentations. There's actual science on this stuff. There's science in other areas too that just seems to be completely ignored. And that will happen if you don't bring wind into the equation, right? If you just model these as fuel driven and think you're gonna, make the situation go away by removing all the trees around your house. I got some swampland to sell you, let me tell you. And the problem is they're hiding behind it. It kind of puts the onus back on the homeowners. Okay. In the most basic sense, I guess it makes sense for the most basic analysis. But these fires are catastrophic because these embers, as thick as the fire falls of Yosemite going sideways, are impinging on houses. Okay. And so think about it. Let's cut out all the oak trees and everything around your property. And there's your house. What's going to protect the house? Okay. Houses make great ember catchers. So, and we were seeing this over and over again. And the houses that had lightly hydrated vegetation of various size classes, I mean, right behind me is a great example of what thin chaparral should look like. It's a park, okay? It's your own little native preserve, okay? And it's beautiful. By having trees around the perimeter of the property, these act to block embers, catch embers, cool embers, and deflect embers. And since I used to be an aerospace engineer, it became very painfully obvious that nobody's looking at the aerodynamics of wind-driven fire. Okay. And there's even houses in paradise that survived unscathed that were completely surrounded by hydrated trees. And you look through the under the branches, and you just see utter devastation, like Hiroshima. So that's what I'm saying. The conventional wisdom on this is really kind of skewed.
Thanks for detailing that study. I am curious, do you know if the Navy utilizes that when building their current barracks or anything like that? I don't know if you have any updated information
That's a
about that.
great question. Okay, so what's interesting is that we published our results during COVID. And despite reaching out to them, nobody ever has asked me from the Navy to come out and do a presentation. And it's very frustrating. Obviously, they paid for the damn thing. Okay. The results were pretty amazing. But all the personnel have changed. I mean, so often when you're working with agencies and that, you get somebody trained, you have a great contact, you guys have good rapport, and then they're gone. You got to start all over again. So I feel like we're kind of at that stage right now. Say, look, you guys pay for the study. The results are awesome. Okay, you should know about this. I'd like to come present it to you. So ironically, but certainly the data is there and it has really informed our approaches and it's working. So that's a
I'm
great
curious if
question. Nobody's ever asked me that.
well, I would like to see the government use the information they paid for, but maybe
Right?
I don't mind being recorded. Maybe that's too much to ask for. I'm curious if you could shop it
Yeah.
around with California agencies. Well,
Right.
okay. I'm gonna put it in the chat, but actually no, sorry. I keep skipping around. Could you describe a little bit more about the concept of fire resistant landscaping and what the features of fire resistant structures and plants are? And I say that because I'm gonna say a couple things and just see if you could speak to these because I heard them in the presentations I watched. So you mentioned hydrated, well-spaced native plants, adequate perimeters and paths, good ground cover, and aprons. So a lot of those things came up when I heard you describe um, like the layout of like ideal structures and things, and I wondered if you could talk about that.
Yes. So there are structural considerations. Um, if we look at these fires up in LA, basically these were many of these homes were built before a lot of your current thinking on architecture and home hardening were in place. And it's tightly packed in there too, right? You don't even hardly get into zone one, right? Let alone zone two. And some of these, homes are like you don't even have hardly, 5 and 5, 10 feet between them, right? So in that respect, as far as a structural standpoint, you really need to create your first line of defense in the green belt surrounding communities. Okay. Typically, you'll see them planting ice plant, right? Or India hawthorn or something. Well, I would propose that you use a mixture of different size, trees, large shrubs, smaller shrubs and ground covers. And, instead of creating like toy soldiers, a wall, if you will, maybe do things in groups of 3 to 5. And then as you go down slope, you kind of overlap the layout. Okay, so that the direction of the fire, the direction of the wind is blocked, but it's done in an overlapping way instead of just massed together. Does that make sense? Because
Mhm.
then that will help with fuel volume, so you don't have this kind of massive crown fire going on. Plus, having different size classes, it almost creates like a maze for these embers to have to work through. And you're also, from an aerodynamic standpoint, you're creating orographic lift, which is basically, when something hits an obstacle, when wind hits an obstacle, it goes up. Usually at least the minimum of 3 times the height of whatever that feature is. Okay. Or it goes sideways. Or the embers actually go into the vegetation, which is hydrated, which catches and cools it. Okay. And so my big thing for communities like Altadena and Palisades is to start at this green belt. You know what? It would be beautiful, just like it is right behind me here. Okay. It would be park-like. It would be evergreen because we'd use mostly evergreen plants like manzanitas and oaks and toyons and lemonade berry and so on. Okay. Be full of birds and butterflies, right? The maintenance would be much less, and so would the water use. Okay, and you wouldn't have the erosion problems. Ice plant is just ugh. It actually is not a good slope stabilizer because it's not mycorrhizal. It doesn't work with mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. It's heavy, and boy does it form a thatch, and boy does ice plant love to burn. Okay, so it's one of the worst things. Plus, it's right hugging the ground, so there's nothing to create that blocking and turbulence and cause the embers to kind of get broken up in that. I can't guarantee, and I want to preface everything I'm saying. I can't guarantee your home won't burn in a firestorm, okay? But we can certainly enhance the heck out of our defensible space. And if anything, at least give fire crews the time to get inside of that green belt and set up to create real solid defense instead of just running from house to house and just trying not to die in the process. Also, even though it's about hydration, one of the worst actors in all these Mexican fan palms. You
Mm.
know, those fronds detach, they're like 4 foot flaming frisbees flying at 40 miles an hour, and they're lighting up everything they touch. And they also create these ember volcanoes from the top. So that would be a good step too, to get rid of the darn Mexican fan palms. But yeah, so that's where I'd be starting in these close packed communities, especially with older homes, and make that your first line of defense. And also it's a win-win-win, right? Because we're also creating ecology, we're creating habitat, right? I mean, it's like everybody wins, all right? And it's beautiful, right? People think it's gonna be dead, brown, and ugly, right? Well, I can tell you, if my landscapes were dead, brown, and ugly, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. I'd still be in aerospace at a desk, probably dead by now from a heart attack or something. So yeah, that's sort of the structure. Around the house, though, we're seeing evidence. I don't know if you guys happen to catch an article, opinion piece in the LA Times about a month or so ago. Luca Carmignani and Max Moritz. They're fire
Oh.
scientists, and they created this article. They talked about saying how hedges and trees were blocking the flow of embers, and that the next door neighbor, which was fully exposed, burned to the ground, and then they'd be singeing on that hedge line, and then on the next house over, it'd be green and intact house, and that a lot of the vegetation was actually burning from the burning houses, other than the other way around where the vegetation burns the houses. Those houses weren't catching on fire from landscapes, I can tell you that. And even John Keeley, my partner, had a home in Altadena that he sold years ago, but he went back and did a study. There was his house, still standing, completely surrounded by green, healthy trees. Singed on the outside, by the way, but not on the inside.
Thanks for going into detail on that one. Um, so you did allude to the opinion piece, and so I was going to ask a little bit more about that. And I know that so I did share in the chat there for everyone. It is the opinion piece. Sorry, I consider it an opinion piece, but it's a well thought out opinion piece about the proposed.
And they are fire scientists. They are
So-
fire ecologists.
Sorry.
So it's not like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but it's about the Zone Zero regulations in the aftermath of the LA fires. Could you share for everyone on this call, and again, it'll live in posterity, the conclusions that they come to, and sorry, that your colleagues come to, and how they were erroneously drawn, and what you believe and they believe are more accurate takeaways or conclusions?
Well, I think some of the accurate takeaways of one of the things is that the fires were moving house to house to house. They were not being ignited for the most part by vegetation near the house. Could be ignited by firewood piled up against the house, or debris that hadn't been cleaned out, or a wooden shed, or old stored planks and boards, and also wooden fences. Wooden fences can be a really serious actor in these fires, especially where the fence makes that 90-degree turn into the house, usually around the garage, and you have a gate. And we counsel people, at least if anything, make that part of the fence non-flammable, masonry, steel, whatever. Because you wick that fire right in under the eaves. It's hot and it's high and it's ferocious, and just catches the roof on fire and the attic, and you're off to the races. So all those things are the real contributors in moving this fire through. These fires, this storm was pretty unbelievable. The winds, the lack of humidity, and the embers, right? There was nothing catching the stuff out the edge of the community, right? It was just coming right on in. And these poor firefighters, man, I mean, it was hell on earth, and they did their best. They really did their best. You look at Altadena, it's just heartbreaking, right? Because a lot of these people have no money. I mean, these were homes that were inherited, had been paid off decades ago, and they didn't, a lot of them didn't have fire insurance, you know, it's just heartbreaking. So we got to give them the best chance of survival here. Okay. Well, what Luca and Max were seeing was that these hedges and that were saving homes right in zone zero, frankly, touching the eaves. Okay. And then, of course, the trees and tree lines and overlapping groupings of trees were breaking up, apparently breaking up and shielding those homes from the ember attack. So, and that's right in line actually with, our approach. And it was very gratifying to see it coming from a source over which I had no influence or, hadn't worked with before. So it was fairly independent. So when you start seeing it from multiple sources and that, then things start to really gain credibility.
Thanks for breaking that down. I appreciate everyone on the call and everyone watching the recording getting to hear your interpretation of the article. Um, I'm gonna save another question that I have because it did come to mind. There's another quote in there that I really like. I think it's an excellent statement so I'm gonna quote it and share, which is vegetation is not monolithic. As California and other states develop new wildfire regulations, they need to recognize the protective role that well-managed plants can play, along with many other benefits of urban vegetation. Could you elaborate and clarify how native plant maintenance can be incorporated into wildfire regulations?
Well, absolutely. Okay. So again, I put up the slide behind me because I wanted to give people a visual of what this looks like, right? And you see there's different size tiles. This went through both the Cedar Fire and the Witch Creek Fire, and the home survived. The whole area, the chaparral, and that survived. And it's just a beautiful park. And so it's very important to limb these plants up, like you see with these manzanitas. But we save those trimmings, we mulch it up and put it right back down the ground, because when you've opened up a plant community like this, then it becomes vulnerable to weeds. Okay. Weeds are the worst actors in the ecology because they still moisture, they actively destroy the native ecology and all the support infrastructure in the soil that helps provide minerals and water. So now you've got really sick plants completely surrounded by dry mustard and grasses. And those are your ladder fuels. And those ladder fuels are flashy fuels. So acres can go up literally simultaneously. Okay. So weed control is huge. Limbing them up is huge. Thinning them out. Okay. Especially targeting dead vegetation, dead branches, that kind of thing. But not going any more than about 40 to 50% open space. If you go beyond that, it actually, at minimum, is diminishing returns, but can also make the problem worse because you have no blocking, catching, all that. And it also gets to be really weedy if it's really opened up too much. Okay. So that's how you maintain natural vegetation. When it comes to native landscapes, what we do is first off, I'm not a huge fan of drip systems in most cases because it kind of sets up a mini swamp ecology around the plants. Native shrublands like this aren't getting watered with soil saturation. They're getting watered with rainfall. And that rainfall goes through those leaves and it hits the mulch, and a lot of it's absorbed by the mulch and also leaches out really micro nutrients out of there at a measured slow rate that is appropriate for the supporting infrastructure, i.e., mycorrhizal fungi. And mycorrhizal fungi permeate the upper layer of soils, tremendous amount of biomass, gives you structure, aeration, moisture capacity, and links all the plants together in the community like they're one giant organism. Okay. So you're trying to support and foster that because in droughts, they're going to be pulling off that reservoir with moisture. And that moisture is there also to help them the ones that are stump sprouters to recover after a fire. You get this explosive stump growth, right? That's being fed by the mycorrhizal fungi. That's what's supporting it, holding it up, and it's got minerals and water. So hydration is everything. Overhead irrigation is how we hydrate them. There's a number of systems out there. My personal favorite are called MP rotators, which are made by Hunter Irrigation. They're a local Southern California company. They have the best engineering, and I'm not paid by Hunter to say this. I just believe in the product. And it's like gentle rainfall. Okay. 0.4 inches of equivalent precipitation an hour. And they love it. They love it. So in a inland location like Ramona here, I'm usually watering about once every 8 to 10 days in summer. And because they put down so little water, I usually run them for 30 to 40 minutes. But 30 minutes with an MP rotator is only 2/10 of equivalent precipitation. Well within their tolerance limits. Don't let anybody tell you can't overhead water or even summer water native plants. Okay. Every now and then we get thunderstorms, and those thunderstorms don't kill the native plants. Believe me, you can dump an inch in a thunderstorm. Okay. So I'm saying everywhere you look, the conventional wisdom is really twisted on this stuff. So that's kind of the general approach to the care and maintenance and how we set up these native landscapes, and they're just performing really well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm gonna ask one more question. It's more that I want it on the record because I know that elected officials are gonna push back because Terry, Lisa, and others hear this all the time. Um, you're probably gonna hear that we don't have sufficient labor or resources to install and maintain native landscaping. In your opinion, do we?
They're landscaping out there, right? So do you want to do palm trees and red apple? Or do you want to do manzanitas, toyon, lemonade, berry, oaks, and cherries? I mean, the choice is yours, right? And the thing is, we have conventional landscapes, we have drought tolerant non-native landscapes, which people really seem to like, and then we have native landscapes. Okay. The thing is, hydration is the key, and the fact that it takes the least amount of water to hydrate natives, it takes about double the native watering to hydrate things like rosemary and cistus, right? Beautiful plants, but they just need a little more water. They come from Mediterranean climates that also get summer rainfall and a little bit higher levels of precipitation, okay? And then you have your conventional landscapes, which don't even know how to hang on to the water, and it just vaporizes away, and then what's left burns. I just put up a photo of one of the 25 fire events, Witch Creek Fire here. That's 100% native landscape. Notice the wooden deck. The wooden deck is still there, okay? This didn't develop enough radiant heat to even ignite that wooden deck. And by the way, I didn't build that deck, okay? But yeah, and we see this over and over and over again. I've got photo documentation of all this stuff. And this is what we see. And in fact, it's all live. It's just scorched. And here it is, 3 years later. Okay. This could be a before or after photo. Okay. Beautiful green and fire resistant.
I
And
really
also,
like that you
one thing
incorporated
I
the
want to
photos.
mention. Sorry, I just wanted to mention one of the things they're doing up north is they're banning our favorite mulch. Our favorite mulch is shredded redwood bark or gorilla hair. It is by far, it has the best properties for native ecology. It most closely emulates the natural duff layer that forms in shrubland communities. It's incredibly slow to break down, which is what you want. You don't want to load the soil up with a lot of fertility and organic matter. It holds moisture unbelievably efficiently. Okay. And you know what? It looks great. And they think that it's going to just, move the fire, burn it down, burn down your landscape. Well, take a look at this. This is how it actually performed in real fires. Let me find it for you. There we go. This is in the cedar fire. And what you see here is shredded redwood bark. Now, nowadays, I would not put it right up against the house there. Okay. We learned a lesson. However, it is the perfect object lesson, and you couldn't have designed an experiment better. Those those plastic flags were put in before the fire. Okay. Now there's one that's slightly melted. That was not due to the mulch, it was due to the burning garden hose. Okay. The rest are intact. And then if you look over here by the hose, by the flagstone, you'll see there's a plastic drain grate. It hasn't melted. There's even areas of unburnt mulch. Okay. And if you want to know what the actual flame height was, well, look at the screed line on the house. Look at the foundation. There's the scorch marks. And I got tons of different pictures of this landscape from different areas and stuff. It's all the same. 2 inches or less. Okay. What is the difference? Well, when they ran their tests, they used fluffed up mulch, completely oxygenated, right? A lot of times they're just throwing pine needles and then turning on a big fan and throwing embers at it. And yeah, it lit up like crazy. Well, we were kids. We used to burn steel wool too. Burns great. Okay. But the difference in the real world scenario that you're looking at is this stuff is highly consolidated. That's another reason to use the overhead irrigation because it mats it down. And at that point, it's a very poorly oxygenated fuel. And it does what you see behind me. And there was like 100 flags in various areas of this landscape. None of them were melted. Huge areas of the mulch were not even burned. Okay, and this is the cedar fire. This is a serious fire event. So, like I say, again, we're back at it. Conventional wisdom is just really skewed, you know. And Bert told me 30 years ago this is what would happen. And then look at us. Here we are. Yep, pretty much as predicted.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So that is in the YouTube video that you shared with me. So that's in the chat too, if people want more details. You're doing really well with time. So I have two more questions and then we'll turn it over to the audience. I like
Yeah, I
to
want you guys, please ask me questions.
yeah.
Please challenge me, whatever. Just please, let's go for it. It's all about education.
Good. So this is more just because I want people to know more about what they can do. But one more thing about policy, if you don't mind. So the article also refers to the current proposed regulations, and you have two, as overly prescriptive and simplistic. Could you speak about what types of regulations and approaches you believe would most likely reduce wildfire risk or danger? And as another example, or for example, what are complementary building and landscaping codes and regulations that you believe are needed? Because we also have a great
Well,
buildings committee, so I want to complement that with ideal building codes.
yeah, a great question. These are all great questions, Andy, by the way. Thank you. Um, so one of the most important concepts is that fire resistance starts at the home outward, not the landscape inward. Okay. Most of your modern construction actually does pretty well in fires. Okay. What am I talking about? You guys probably know, some of you probably know these already. Boxed in eaves, no exposed rafters, vertical vents in those eaves that are screened over, Class B or better roofing, and if it's tile roofing, they have to be plugs along the ends of the runs, so they can't make birds or rats can't make nests in there and just ignite the subroof. Double paned windows at minimum in the direction because these fires are going to come from the north or northeast. That is the pattern. So at minimum on that side of the house, double paned windows with metal frames. I'm not sure how fiberglass does, but I will tell you that vinyl melts. Vinyl just, it softens, the panes fall in, and you're off to the races, okay? Vents, all vents should be screened. Um, On new construction, like behind me, if this was new construction, that area would have been gravel or DG. In fact, I'll show you what a new zone zero installation looks like. There we go. This is a few years ago. This is out in a place called Harbison Canyon, which is completely surrounded by beautiful chaparral and rare plants. That's what zone zero looks like. Okay. I don't think it's unattractive, actually. It gives you access. The siding on there is hardy board. It's a concrete product. It's not wood. Okay, that's very important. Metal frame double pane windows. Okay. No problem doing this on new construction. Again, the problem is on old landscapes. And what's happening is they're kind of jumping the gun because they're not only trying, they're panicked, but they're also, the politicians are being very performative, right? They want to be seen as actually being effective in doing something. I get that, right? But they're targeting the wrong things. Because if you're removing all the vegetation around the home, you're just making it more vulnerable, right? So that's your zone zero. Then zone one be at the next 30 to 50 feet. That's permanently irrigated, can be 100% native, just natives that can take a little bit more water. All right. Things like coffee berry or yerba buena and stuff like that. And then beyond that, either you're going to have existing chaparral that you want to thin, or you're going to want to do a planted native landscape. And at that point, usually what I'm doing is really spacing them out, but I'm also dotting in trees and large shrubs. And when you look at it perpendicular to the slope, you know, where the direction of the wind, it has that overlapping blocking effect and catching effect, ember catching. There is actually uh, I'm sorry if Cox sucks. It really does. Cox Mobile or Cox Cable. But I had DVR, and during the lilac fire out here, I caught, there's a reporter standing out in Bonsall across the 76 highway. And here comes a fire. He filmed the whole thing. Here comes a fire tornado, full embers. And it crosses the 76 freeway and goes right towards the shopping center where it hit the hydrated landscape. And you could just watch it catch all those embers and put them out. And the tornado fell apart. Okay. And I kept this thing. I was trying to record it, kind of to lift it so I could use it in presentations, and then my DVR died. I lost everything. And for the life of me, I haven't been able to find that footage, if it's even existent anymore. It was like the perfect example of what we're talking about. And that wasn't even native vegetation, but it's probably being watered 3 to 5 times a week, right? So it was hydrated in that respect. Okay. So that's what we're seeing in these landscapes. And that's kind of the approach. Did I answer the question? You know me, I'm kind of an ADHD case. I'm like a golf ball in the
It
shower, so you'll have to excuse me. I did
it
bounce
work
around.
it works because we know, so it's complicated, and yes, I we got it. So, I'm going to end with this question because I like climate leaders and everyone on the call to know what they can do. So, here's my last one, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. How can climate leaders, climate activists, and sustainability minded constituents and residents best advocate for wildfire regulations that mandate or minimally incentivize and transition California towards fire resistant landscapes with native plants?
Well, we need more research for one thing.
Okay.
Okay. I've have a lot of observations and documentation, and it's fitting my theories, right? But there isn't enough research into this stuff. They're looking at all the wrong factors. And that's why I'm really excited about what Luca and Max are doing. And they're out there studying those fires, and they're looking at the effect of vegetation. But I think it's going to be more nuanced, right? And so our approach, again, in new construction, is to do this zone zero non-planted zone. Then if there's existing vegetation, do your best to cut it away from the house and the eaves, thin it out, make sure it's real healthy and hydrated. because for all you know, it might save that house from a fire. It might catch a group of embers that could otherwise get wedged in there and burn, right? I think that's zone zero. Zone one, then the kind of the common prescriptions are not too bad. Even thinning, but you don't want to thin too much, okay, and get weeds and open areas. So, and then, encourage people instead of adjusters telling people to remove beautiful mature oak trees from around their house, recognize that this thing could actually save it. We've seen it over and over again. And I don't know if I have a background here, just real quick. This is up in the San Vicente Estates. Did I pull this photo? I'm sorry, I'm just looking.
Mhm.
Bear with me. I'm sorry. I just
No,
want to.
no. Pictures are worth 1,000 words.
I thought maybe. No, I guess I never downloaded. There is during the Witch Creek fire up in there's a big kind of housing complex called the San Vicente Estates in the East County of San Diego. You could clearly see where they'd done some thinning of the chaparral, and that acted as their first line of defense. And then there are groups of mature oak trees here and there against the houses. And on the fire side, they were singed. On the house side, they were green. Okay. And you just see this over and ubiquitously. Okay. And so I think we need to recognize that those are the factors. The problem is it's hard to quantify this stuff, right? So now what you've got it's being left up to the local fire agencies to enforce this stuff. The legislation isn't complete. They're trying to get ahead of it, right? And they're all up to their own interpretation. And I don't blame them. I understand where they're coming from, right? But there needs to be some nuance to this, and they need to be educated. Everybody needs to be just a little bit of education. I don't think, I've done rocket science, right? This ain't rocket science, all right? I think it makes a lot of sense from a kind of a, just pragmatic standpoint, and still try to figure out how to quantify it legally. But, kind of what I described, I think for zone zero would go a long way. And people would stop freaking out, 'cause people are flipping out about this stuff. And I understand it. I don't blame them. And we don't have to go in there with a literal scorched earth policy and open it up and just keep the house itself completely vulnerable. But unless they start looking at these, recognizing that they're wind driven, not fuel driven, none of that's going to happen. None of that, because I mean, down here in San Diego, we've got a couple of arsonists running around. Well, we're not in the wind season. We're not in Santa Ana's, and so they're usually able to contain these fires without too much spread, fairly safely. Haven't lost too many homes. Those are fuel driven fires. Boy, then you just like you saw 6 months, 8 months ago, you bring in the Santa Ana's at 80 miles an hour and bone dried, and you're off to the races. It's a whole different scheme.
I think that's a very good note to end my questions on. I'll turn it over. Thank you, Greg, for answering my questions. Does anyone in the audience have questions for Greg? Go ahead, Terry.
Oh,
And I
Greg,
see Cindy. So we'll do Terry, then Cindy.
Greg, thank you so much. And everything you said or saying makes a lot of sense. And I truly appreciate that. I sat in on one of CAL FIRE's meetings back in June, and I missed the very beginning of one of their talks, but they had someone from the artificial turf industry there. And afterwards, I found out that they were proposing you put artificial turf in zone 0. And I believe they have that in the report now. And I and another organization put a very long letter, and I found research from Australia where it was real fire, realistic. It was 700 degrees, and 700 degrees, the turf, which is petroleum, melts and burns. So it does not belong in zone 0. And of course, we believe it does not belong anywhere. But I was just curious, those kind of things and all of what you're saying, which makes sense. Have you had an opportunity to like actually meet with CAL FIRE, do a presentation, talk with them, educate them, because it seems like they're coming up with some very unscientific and not really practical information.
Yeah, that's a great question, Terry. The short answer is no. And let me tell you, even though I think our approach, which is based on a lot of fires, we've had more fire-involved native landscapes than anybody else in the state. And plus I have a scientific aerodynamic background. And I had, you know, CAL FIRE veteran firemen as one of my mentors. Despite all that, a lot of times when you don't toe the political line, you know, they don't really want to encourage you because they are invested in these approaches. They're invested in this stuff politically, ego-wise, even intellectually. I mean, they're so invested in it. Yet I often wonder, you know, when you talk to like line firemen, agree with this stuff. Yeah, that's exactly what happens, you know. I noticed that like when you cleared the bare ground, right? These homes are burning left and right. I have photos after photos of absolute environmental devastation, cleared the bare ground, and the house is a pile of rubble with a chimney and maybe some green queen palms around it, and maybe a lawn, right? And that's in 2007 is when it dawned on me. I said, holy cow, this is laminar flow. There's no turbulators. There's no turbulation going on, no turbulence. Okay, nothing is breaking up. In fact, they can speed up along these smooth surfaces just like a wind tunnel. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I wanted to get that information out quickly, so I contacted Rick Halsey from the California Chaparral Institute. And I knew once Rick got a hold of it, boy, it would disseminate quickly. And he was actually interviewing firemen who were confirming this too. So it's actually management. It's at a political level. It's this ad hoc committee that they put together to make recommendations on the thing. It's all happening up north. Nobody's talking to us down here. I've actually had experience. And it's really obvious. It became very obvious at those meetings that it was the insurance industry that was running all the protocols. And the insurance industry's research arm, was it HSBC? Their home safety, SBHC, anyway, whatever it is. They have a research arm out of South Carolina. They're the ones that are throwing the loblolly pine needles at them and embers and flame. It is completely non-representative of reality here. And yet they're the ones that, I mean, they were almost genuflecting to the insurance reps. Okay. And I talked, and Luca talked, you know, and they kind of treat you like you're a wingnut in the woods, right? And so I said, screw that. You know, I'm going to the end user, I'm going to the homeowners, okay. And if anything, let's create some upward pressure. And I think maybe you guys even subscribe to that a little bit too. It's a lot of times you try to get through these ingrained policies and that goes nowhere, and they are real good at blocking, you know. So that's been my frustration. So I'm just trying to reach out to groups like yourselves, wonderful groups that are effective and known, and trying to make inroads that way, you know, because we have real experience and I can explain it too, because, you know, I know a little bit about aerodynamics and stuff, thermodynamics. Great question, Terry. Did I answer your question though, Terry?
For the most part, I just wish we could get you in front of more people. You know, we also work with Resilient Palisades, and of course, they're working really hard in the Tracy Park to try to make sure that they build back better, more safely.
Yeah.
You know, so It's a very important
I've been
aspect.
telling everybody, get me some gigs up there, guys. Really, I want to reach these homeowners. I want to reach fire safe councils. I do talk to a lot of fire safe councils out here, which have some influence. And they know me pretty well, and I get general agreement, frankly. Because this is like a win-win-win thing, right? You're not destroying the environment. You're not blaming the plants. We can have beautiful communities surrounded by beautiful park-like native vegetation with birds and butterflies and low water, right? It's kind of a neat concept, right? And it's not rocket science. I think it makes sense to people. And so, yes, tomorrow I'm going to be on KPCC
Oh,
with Jacob Margolis. I think I need to call in around 9:40 or something. So I'm going to be on that. So that's another little bit of an inroad there. He interviewed me a couple weeks ago for an article he wrote. So we're trying.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No,
Thank you, Terry. Sorry, really quickly. Cindy, you had a question?
yes. I was curious to know whether you have any thoughts on ruminants as a means of controlling vegetation in Zone 2. I'm thinking specifically of goats, but I've heard other animals being used also.
The only animals that I like in these areas are bovines and maybe horses. I mean,
Okay.
goats eat everything, sheep eat anything, llamas eat everything good. I've tried them all. And the problem is that they're indiscriminate, whereas bovines are rather discriminating about what they will target. They're very targeted because most of these weeds came over as cow pasture. Now they won't eat mustards, okay? And if you have goats that are trained just to eat mustard, well, more power to you. But unfortunately, they tend to just raise everything down to the ground. Now you got bare ground again, you got no ecology, you got a perfect weed patch coming in and fire. And so that's kind of my thoughts on those, but we have used them all. I've tried them all. And bovines by far, they even leave the native grasses alone. Okay.
Mm.
But the problem, the limitations, obviously they're big and heavy, and they don't like rocky slopes or things like that.
Yeah.
So they like to be on level ground. Horses, on the other hand, are really good too. The only thing with horses, they'll target the native grasses, but other than that, they do a really good job too. Yeah, llamas, they eat everything good. They spit at you. And packies and all those things too. Yeah, same thing.
Thank you, Cindy. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hart with the LA Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance. Our trees committee has taken a very active, passionate interest in Zone Zero. And I actually was going to ask about the insurance industry because we've heard that they're the driving force behind this. But my other question is, how did you make the transition between your first career and your second career?
You mean it's not a just natural, logical transition from aerospace
Well,
engineer to landscape architecture?
maybe it is. I don't know enough about it.
Honestly, so I had a real good career. I did quickly move into management. So some of the fun went out of it and the stress increased. And I started to get kind of depressed, honestly. And I wasn't suicidal, but I mean, I was really getting depressed, and I like, I got nothing to lose here. And I love native plants. I know a thing or two about them. Why don't I just, I'm not married. Why don't I just try to turn my avocation into my vocation? And so I just started landscaping, learning the ropes, got my contractor's license, and never looked back. And it was hard at first. I had to starve a little bit. There were days my refrigerator was empty. I had some nice clients that would actually prepay some of their bills just so I could put something in my refrigerator. But that's what passion does, right? Passion drives you through this stuff. And little by little, learn the ropes. Everybody that I knew very kindly, very concernedly tried to talk me out of it, said I was crazy for going into native plants. All right, it'll never be a success. They always die. They're ugly. Nobody wants them, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I said, well, geez, I don't go to Yosemite or Idlewild for the palm trees and the red apple, you know? And I go there in summer. It looks beautiful to me then. This isn't making sense, guys. This logical disconnect. All right. But what I realized the disconnect was that they were trying to treat natives like ornamentals and killing them with kindness. You know, plus they weren't looking at suburban pests and pathogens. It's a whole nother presentation, but let me tell you, Argentine ants are the vector of death. But that's a whole nother presentation. Anyway, but because of my science background, research I've done, you know, I was able to, I think and my ADHD, because when you're ADHD, one thing that it has enabled me to do is to see relationships, see patterns, and kind of think laterally on some of this stuff and make connections that might not be obvious to people that are looking at it from more of a traditional standpoint. And I count my lucky stars that I didn't work for a landscape company or anything prior to. So I was totally open to all these inputs. And I had a mentor who was a brilliant biochemist who understood native ecology and who really taught me well. So all those things kind of came together. I don't regret it a bit.
All right. And I think we'll close out unless there are more questions with Andrew.
Thanks so much, Greg. I just had a couple of two questions real quick. A lot of times we're giving presentations and talking on this subject, and we speak to tenants who are living in multifamily situations. So if you could just briefly address, what would you say to a group of tenants who wants to make these changes? And I'll just briefly say I'm also, luckily enough, the president of an HOA, and in December I put hardy board on my east-facing exposure looking at the Rose Bowl, and I had so much difficulty because it's expensive and I'm the president and no one wanted to do it, but I got it financed and done. But this idea of multifamily housing and getting groups of people to make these changes, so tenants and then condos, I guess, is the two questions.
We still have a ways to go. You know, that's why I'm working at a very basic level, just to kind of overturn a lot of the myths and misconceptions about natives, because there has to be a demand for it. And right now, a lot of people just think they're the boogeyman. That's what all this legislation is doing. It's turning native ecology into the enemy. And so they're going to do all this crud and they're going to destroy the ecology. And remember, it takes 150,000 minimum per acre to restore. Okay. When you could just leave it in the first place and not destroy the habitat. But when you come to multifamily situations, you know, obviously it's the landlord who, you know, makes the, you know, if it's an apartment complex or condo, the owners are the ones that really can create the change. And that's through education, interest, getting their word out. In neighborhoods and HOAs, I have on several occasions gone out and done presentations just like tonight. And a lot of times it can start to have an influence. You know, there is expense involved too, right? And you know, one of the things, if you're doing, you're reaching out to an HOA, what we've been doing is suggesting they do like little pilot projects, something that they don't have to do a special assessment, you know, because that's always a dirty word. So if you're not having to do that, then you can do an example area that is well exposed that everyone can see and get their buy-in when they see how beautiful it is and all the virtues.
That's the way we
And
did
that's a
this
good place
one.
to start.
We're starting piecemeal, but it was an uphill slog, and I'm just grateful to have people like you who are kind of in the education stage. Thank you so much for your information.
Oh, no, you're welcome. I appreciate you too. And you know, we can actually start to create some of this defensible space on the north and northeast sides of the community as your first line of defense, I think that's also a good place to start. That way you're not overwhelming with hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars worth of new landscape. You can just create a fine approach, explain what you're doing, and let's give it a shot.
Much appreciated.
Thank you everyone for your questions. Greg, you took us to 8:29. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate everyone for joining us. I know it's Sunday night. People probably want to enjoy the rest of their weekend. Charles, we miss you. We hope that you enjoy this in spirit, and I hope that Charles enjoys the recording when it's posted. I'll send it to the marketing team. Any last minute updates? Greg, any final words?
Well, like I said, I'm going to be on the radio tomorrow. Let's see how that goes. I was impressed with Jacob. He is their science reporter at KPCC. I mean, I grew up in Chatsworth, right, up in the valley, and moved to San Diego in 1992. But I used to work at KCSN, and I also fell in love with KPFK, Pacifica. So it's in my blood, right? And so I really support everything you guys are doing, the media that you guys interface with a lot. And we just got to get the word out, man. Just get the word. And if anybody has connections and want me to do a Zoom presentation, because I actually have whole slideshow presentations that I put together, I'd love to do it. Seriously, let's get the word out.
All right, on that note, spread the word. I'm going to end with my signature phrase. Thank you, everyone, for your leadership and activism. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.